Super. Well, welcome to this event, which actually is our very final public consultation event of the IFR for MPO project. Extraordinarily, it's our last event during Exposure Draft 3, which is our final exposure draft. So we're really, really delighted to have you with us. I know some people are struggling with the Teams to Zoom change, so thank you for finding us here. This is your chance to really share some of your opinions and thoughts on the proposals in ED3. We have got this slide deck translated into French and Spanish, which Brian is sharing in the chat. We've also got some instructions for translating the captions in the chat, but now I come to think of it, those are for Teams, so we'll ignore that. The downside of Zoom is the translation, so I'm sorry about that. But we will have Spanish and French discussion rooms, breakout rooms, and we have also got all the polls in Spanish and French. So welcome to our French and Spanish speaking colleagues. This is our agenda for today. So the first 5 minutes have already gone, some opening remarks and welcome. We're going to break the content into two 40-minute chunks. The first half will be about donor reporting, that's the practice guide, supplementary statements, and expenses, that's classification and disclosure of expenses. And within each 40-minute, there'll be a chance to do a little bit of recapping, the bulk of it in discussion groups, and then some feedback and polls. Then in the second slot, we'll be looking at fund accounting and the illustrative financial statements. And I'm delighted that Karen Sanderson from SIPFA is with us. She'll be leading us through that, obviously, as the key author for a lot of these papers, a lot of this content. So as this isn't really a training, this isn't so much a question time. If you do have questions, feel free, but we won't be able to answer them really during this time together. We could answer them in writing afterwards. This is really a chance for you to share your comments, opinions, and feedback with us. So with that, just where we are in terms of the big picture, this is our third exposure draft. We issued it in May, the end of May 2028, and it closes on the 16th of September. And your feedback will then be part of the finalization process of the feedback from all the exposure drafts to finalize INPAG, which we're looking to publish next year. So with that, and I can see a few more people have joined us, which is great. Let me hand over to Karen. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks very much, Sam. So as Sam has said, today is not a training session. This is an opportunity for you to talk to other people across the sector about the proposals, to help develop your thinking and to share your thoughts as well. So the way we're going about this, I'll spend no more, hopefully, than 10 minutes framing some of the content that is in Exposure Draft 3. There will then be a discussion in breakout rooms, and then we'll come back for some feedback. The challenge will be getting through the content in 10 minutes. There's quite a lot to get through, so please bear with me as I canter through this at a reasonable pace. So first up, talking about INPAG and donor reporting. So INPAG is about general purpose financial reporting, a set of financial statements and supporting information that is there for the general users of the financial statements. So it is there for everybody to use. What it isn't is special purpose financial reports, which are frequently prepared for donors. So if in the visual that you have here, you could be an NPO producing multiple different types of reports for different funders. What we are doing in INPAG is looking at how we connect the two of them together. So in INPAG itself, there is a new section 37, which is about supplementary information. And there is also a new practice guide, INPAG Practice Guide 1, that is about how to prepare supplementary statements for individual projects, programs, donors, subsets of information that an NPO might need to report on. And what we've done in developing this is to create a bridge so that the supplementary statements are connected to the information that are in the general purpose financial reports. Have the next slide, please. So why have we done this? Well, I think we heard from the very beginning that there are challenges around reporting to donors. As I said just now, they come in different formats, different requirements that create huge burdens for NPOs who are trying to meet that need. So there's a huge difficulty for NPOs who are preparing financial statements in terms of the burden that comes with that. And what also happens, because donors are requesting information for their own purposes, they are frequently unconnected to the general purpose financial statements. And that creates a challenge in terms of assurance. How do you know that the information that is in the donor report is the same as what got reported, or the underlying information is the same that has been included in the general purpose financial statements? So this represents a set of challenges both for preparers, but also for donors. And that has been in our minds as we have been developing INPAG and the new practice statement. Next slide, please. So in the new INPAG Practice Guide 1, there is a whole set of guidance about how to prepare a supplementary statement. And what it's intended to do is to provide key auditable financial information about a set of the NPO's activities. Now, as I said, that could be a project, a program, a specific grant that a donor has provided, but the key thing is that it links to the general purpose financial statements. In this guidance, we are requiring a set format to the statement. So the rows that go across that go down the statement are identical no matter who the statement is being prepared for. That is common across all statements that are prepared under this guide. They also have a set of supporting notes that go to the purpose and scope of the statement and how it has been prepared. And this cross-references to the financial statements themselves. And therefore, fundamental to this is that each supplementary statement is reconcilable to the financial statements. It is the information that has enabled the financial statements to be produced. But whilst we are requiring a set format in terms of the rows, what we are providing is optionality in terms of the columns that can be used to give flexibility in terms of how information is provided. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Can I get to the next slide, please? So the prescribed format, well, what does that look like? There is, as you can see, some set rows for income, but also some set rows in terms of expenses. And what we talk about in this statement are direct expenses and support costs. But we are giving some optionality about how support costs are shown. So there is a choice about showing support costs separately or allocating them to each of the other rows that are required as shown on the statement in front of you. So you could allocate your support costs. So for example, support costs might include the finance director for your organization. You could show their costs as support costs, or equally you could show the relevant amount as part of employment. But employment, travel and subsistence, supplies and materials, etc., must be shown on the statement, even if there are no costs in them. But there is, as I say, a choice about how support costs are shown on this statement. And the direct expenses will include what we call the direct costs and the shared costs, but not the support costs unless that option is taken up. Can I take the next slide, please? The other option that we provide in the supplementary statement is about how inventory and capital costs are shown. We know from the feedback that we get that some donors like to see that the money spent on inventory and the money spent on either purchasing capital items or developing them is shown as and when it is spent. They don't want to see depreciation. They don't want to know when an item of inventory has been used. They want to know that the money that's been provided has been used for the purposes of either buying that asset or buying that inventory. So we're providing an optional section in the statement that allows that full purchase cost to be shown. And what we require in that section is that we take out any of that inventory that's been used or any depreciation that has been charged, so that we avoid any potential double counting and instead add in the actual purchases made in that financial period. Again, that's an optional section. It doesn't have to be used. Next slide, please. I said I would come back to the additional information. So as I said, you can have it has many different columns on the supplementary statement as is relevant to your particular stakeholder. You could put a column in there that shows the amounts in the donor currency. You could show the budget that was set for a particular set of activities. You could show what's been sent in a prior period. You could, if your grant period is partway through the year, you could split the amount between two different time periods, and also show different income sources, for example, if you have matched funding. So there's quite a bit of flexibility there in terms of how you can use columns to show the relevant expenses. Turning now to expenses, in the main INPAG itself, there's a whole section on the classification of expenses. And in that, INPAG allows a classification by nature, which is focused on the inputs that have been used. You spent it on salaries, wages, rent, materials, travel costs, etc. It allows an analysis by function, which is focused really on the activities that have taken place, so much more delivery or output based. Or we allow a presentation that is a combination of those two. So if you've got some of your activities where the input information is more relevant, you can do that. And if you've got some activities where dividing it into function is more relevant, you can do that. So you can do a bit of a mixture between the two. But if you are doing the functional or the mixed, there is a requirement that you have to show the type of expenses, that input-based information for each functional line that's there. They don't have to be quantified, they just need to be described. Importantly, though, what we are including in the guidance is what we call a rebuttable presumption. And that rebuttable presumption is that a by nature analysis should be used unless this does not provide the most relevant and reliable information. So that's intended to simplify things for potential users. There's a section on fundraising costs, and there is a requirement for those to be reported. We've identified in the guidance 3 different types of fundraising costs: donations, gifts and grants, and monies spent to raise those, which I think will be familiar to many. But we've also included as categories costs associated with commercial and trading activity that are carried out in order to raise funds for an NPO, and equally where an NPO holds investments and the returns on those investments can be used for the NPO's missional objectives. So these are 3 potentially different categories that we're have included in the draft guidance. We've also included some guidance about different types of costs: direct costs, shared costs, and support costs. Direct costs are those costs that you can directly charge. There is one individual working on a particular project. You can allocate all of their time to that project. Shared costs are where, say that one individual is working on 2 projects and you can allocate their costs based on time. Or you have a vehicle that is being used on multiple projects and you can allocate their costs based on mileage. The third category of support costs are where things cannot be directly allocated because they're about how the whole organization is run. They're organization wide and typically cover kind of governance type activities that an organization covers. So we identify each of these 3 categories, which will be relevant when you're looking at functional or mixed classification, fundraising costs, and in looking at those supplementary statements that I mentioned earlier. The key thing is that the method that is used is reasonable, consistent, and faithfully provides a true picture of what's happening in the NPO. Next slide. There are some disclosure requirements. The 3 categories of fundraising costs need to be shown separately. There's a new disclosure about benefits to volunteers. So if they are getting, they might not being paid, but if they're getting other benefits, that those are disclosed. And also losses, write-offs, and special payments. So we're talking about here about fraud, perhaps theft of things. There might be that there is some kind of contractual dispute that you settle without going through the court and make some kind of extra contractual payment. It's those kinds of things that we're seeking to capture in there. And then governing body member compensation and employment related disclosures are also swept up in the proposals, so that those that have got oversight responsibility for an NPO, that whether they are paid or not is disclosed, and if they are paid, the amount that they're paid, or whether they get any other kind of non-monetary benefits or out-of-pocket expenses. And then similarly, in terms of employees, again, we're looking at salaries that are paid, any other kind of benefits or bonuses, or any other contractual payments that are received. So that was very quick and dirty in terms of some of the content that is in ED3 relating to those topics.
Super. Thank you, Karen, for that romp through some pretty dense material, but hopefully most of you are already familiar with this, and this is just a reminder or a recap to bring you into the space. So what we're going to do is split you into 3 groups. I haven't seen anyone, Brian, you can confirm, I haven't seen anyone saying they want to be in a dedicated French or Spanish group. So we will just have 3 English-speaking groups. The questions are, you'll be according to your group number. So group 1, I guess, will be looking at question set A. Group 2 will be looking at question set B, because we don't have the French or Spanish. And group 3 will be looking at question set C. We basically want different people to be looking at different sets of questions. Please do turn on your video. Don't be shy. So we can get the conversation going quickly. And if you could agree on 1 or more members of your group to be note takers, to jot down some key points. And then when you come back from the chat to put those key points into, we'll use the Q&A function in Zoom. It's not question and answer, but we're using it for the feedback that is going to come from these group discussions. So I think Brian is going to put those questions into the chat now. They're here, but there's no way that you'll be able to read those when you go into your group. So the document is in the chat. Please download that. That's got all these questions in French and Spanish as well. And then we'll put you in groups and you can discuss group 1, room 1, discuss question A, room 2, question B, room 3, question see. Okay, so Brian, are you ready to send us into breakout
Yes.
room? Brilliant. Off you go. Enjoy your chance to have a chat, and we look forward to welcoming you back in 15 minutes. Thanks. Back. Great. So welcome back from those breakout rooms. The one I saw was struggling to know where to get started and which questions to answer. So hopefully you found your groove and were able to discuss at least one or two of those questions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a quick poll. You can do that by getting the camera on your phone and taking a photo or scanning that QR code. That will take you to the poll on forms. There's also a link which Brian is posting in the chat so that you can open up that poll on another browser on your desktop if you prefer. So I can either do it on your phone by opening your camera and pointing it at that QR code, or copy the links in the chat, the link in the chat. Great. So while people are doing that, if you were a note taker from your group, please also use the Q&A function if you can find it. You might need to use the 3 dots to record some of the key points in your group. Got any issues or confusions, please do type in the chat. I see at least a couple of people have responded to the poll so far, so that's great. Q&A is turned off. It's annoying. If Q&A isn't working, then please use the chat. Sorry about that. I thought we had activated it. So getting that, your response, in terms of the poll, don't put put it in the chat. If you can actually log on to the poll itself using the QR code or the link. In terms of the outcome or some of the key points from your discussion, yes, if you could put that into the chat, that would be ideal. If that's okay. Thanks, GetNet. So we've had 8 responses to the poll so far. It'd be great if we could get another couple. And we're looking forward to some comments and summary points from those group chats that you had. Really, we need a whole day to do this, not 90 minutes, but it's very difficult. I would have loved to have us all together for a day. Getnet smiling. You would have liked a whole day, wouldn't you, Getnet? Karen, do you want to quickly comment on some of these results in the poll, even as people are finishing, and we can
I can do that. I was just going to say this is a bit like speed dating for ED3. So it's very quick, but hopefully it will get some thoughts going. So in terms of the responses that have come in, I think there is the majority of you supporting the prescribed format, and obviously there's some not sure. And I think that probably is about familiarity and understanding the requirements, so which I think is good. And then looking at the supplementary statements again around, well, what actually is useful in there. Biggest support for the flexibility on the presentation of support costs, so that can be shown separately or across the headings. Some likes around the columns and how those can be used, as well as the reconciliation. I missed the ability to publish as an annex. I think that we didn't mention that. I didn't mention that when I was talking, but that clearly is something that helps us as well link the supplementary statements to the main financial statements as well. We'll move us on to the next one. The rebuttable presumption. So 100% yes, maybe I should stick at that and walk away, but I can see that a third of you roughly have got some buts about that. It would be good to understand what the caution is in terms of the rebuttable presumption. So if you've got any reasons why you went yes but on that, perhaps you could just put those in the chat as well. Really interested to hear why you're not so sure about that. Fundraising, so strong support for the cost of attaining grants and donations, which I think is the more straightforward one, and less support for the commercial and trading and investment, but still some support for it there. So I think it is relevant in some contexts and could be useful, and I think that's the thing we have to try and balance in the guidance as we develop it. Just want to turn to the final one, Sam. So the allocation using direct shared and support costs. So all right, 80% of you say yes, 10% no, and 1 no. Again, really good to understand for those who said no or yes, but what's your hesitation around that? Why do you think the proposals might not work? Because we're keen obviously to look at how do we improve it. So Sam, I wasn't looking at the chat whilst I was looking at the slides. I don't know if there's anything that you want to pull out of the chat.
Well, just that some comments have started coming in. Anita and Rita, our team doesn't agree with the proposal to classify investment costs as fundraising costs, and that came out in the poll as well. This idea that investment costs don't feel like they are part of the definition of fundraising costs. That's coming out there. Group B tended to agree with classification by nature, the rebuttable presumption. However, functional and potentially other factors would be useful as well.
Yeah.
Hence, the flexibility is good.
Yeah.
Agreed on the shared cost, but would be good to see the overall cost for a whole project. And that's, I think, where the supplementary statements come in really well, because you can see a supplementary statement for the whole project, both the direct and the shared costs, and get a picture of the true cost. Might be allow other ways of classification and even hybrid. That's right. So that's exactly what the proposal is. So you can have natural, you can have functional, and you can even have, if that's what you mean by hybrid, you can even have a mixed classification where you've got direct costs and some functional costs. So I don't mean direct, I mean costs by nature and some functional as well. That's also an option. Group A agreed with question 1. Other narration activity reports will be more useful if a guide on reconciliation note between activity reports and financial report included. Now that's interesting. So when we talk about the reconciliation, it's not a reconciliation between an activity report, like a narrative, what we did and what the numbers show. When we're talking about reconciliation, we're talking about the general purpose whole of entity financial statements and a particular note in that account, which we're going to look at a sort of summary of it, and the grant only report, the grant report, reconciling those to the supplementary statement and the main financial accounts. That's what we're talking about. So getting it, if you wanted to, if we've misunderstood that, please do clarify that. Super. Please do put in some other comments. We really look at these deeply, and if we've got clarifications, we can come back to you. But please do share your thoughts, especially if you put a no or a yes but in the poll. Please let us know your reservations and reasons, because that is really helpful. Great. So with that, we're going to move on to the next section. Back to you, Karen. Even if you can type and listen, semi-listen at the same time, if you've got something to share for the first batch, please do that, even if you're listening with half an ear to Karen. Okay.
Great. Can you move us on, Sam? And this is going to take the same structure as the first session. So in here we're talking about fund accounting, which is a concept familiar to some, not to others, but really important concept within INPAG. And it's really about the ability to track resources through separate funds for different purposes. We say that all organisations have got a general fund, even if they have got zero balances in a general fund. All organisations have one. I think the question is, are there any other funds other than the general fund? And what we say in INPAG is that another fund might exist if there is a legal requirement to separately track resources and their use. That might give rise to a fund. Or there are reasonable expectations that resources will be used for a specific set of activities and that those activities will be tracked. And those reasonable expectations may come from people external to the organisation or people internal to the organisations. But reasonable expectations is fundamental to this. So that's how you determine whether there is a fund. Then there is a question about, is that a fund that has restrictions, or is it a fund that doesn't have restrictions? And in INPAG, we have got there are two criteria. The first one is that resources are limited to a specific purpose or activity because of an externally imposed legal or equivalent arrangement. And the second one is about an external public commitment that is made at the launch of a fundraising campaign or before it, that commits that resources will be used for a very specific purpose or activity. If either of those are met, then the fund should be presented as part of funds with restrictions. If those criteria are not met, then it's presented as part of funds without restrictions. So this is very much externally focused. Next slide, please. In Exposure Draft 3, when we were talking about grant revenue and grant expenses, we talked about two different kinds of grant arrangement: enforceable grant arrangements and other funding arrangements. What we're proposing in INPAG is that all enforceable grant arrangements are shown as a fund with restriction. But for other funding arrangements, it could be presented with restrictions or without restrictions. And really that will depend on whether those criteria that I just mentioned have been met or have been met. So it's important to note that how it's accounted for is maybe different to how the fund is presented, particularly if it's an OFA. Next slide, please. INPAG also looks at what can be charged to a fund. And what the principle that we're looking at here is that it should include all of the relevant expenses. So all those expenses that relate to the activities in the fund should be charged to it. And that is the case even if a grant arrangement doesn't allow them, or if there are currently insufficient resources to cover them. And so the fund should include all the direct and shared costs. It should also include a relevant share of support costs, and also things like foreign exchange gains and losses as well, if they're relevant to that particular fund. So we want to be transparent about what is the cost of running the activity in the fund, whether it's eligible or ineligible against the grant. Next slide, please. Funds without restrictions may include internally designated funds. So there's no external imposition, but internally, senior management or members of an oversight group have an expectation that certain things will be tracked separately. Then that might be for a capital investment program or a restructuring or something like that, where resources need to be tracked. It also includes any other funds where there isn't this externally imposed requirement or external commitment that has made that meets the criteria in the slide that I showed you earlier. Showing funds with restrictions can be really important for questions about resilience, because those are the funds without restrictions, those are the ones that an NPO can use at its discretion, and can be used to address unexpected or unforeseen circumstances. So it's important to show those things because it helps understand resilience. Next slide, please. We're also including in INPAG new disclosure requirements, the most important of which is that each material fund needs to be disclosed. And for each of those funds, you can see the opening balance, the amount of income and expense, other changes and transfers, and the closing balance on that fund. So that you get a picture of what's happened to that fund over the financial reporting period. There are also some additional requirements about why there is a balance on a fund. If the activity in the fund has been completed, why is it still there? And also that internally designated funds are also shown for those resilience purposes that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. So what might this look like? So those disclosures. So this is just gives you an example of that. And you can see in here that enforceable grant arrangements are shown. Similarly, the other funding arrangements are shown in here. And you can see how those, through the columns, the opening balances, what's happened in the year and the closing balance. This is really important to being able to tell the story. So in this example, you can see that the amount of income that has been received within funds within restrictions is much higher than the expenses. And that is leading to a surplus for the NPO in the financial reporting period. This kind of information can help show the funds that the NPO is holding that it's going to spend in a future period, and actually that money is committed for a specific purpose. It also shows how money is being transferred between funds. How a fund that has restrictions is being supported by unrestricted funds, and how assets might be being moved between funds as well. So very important as part of telling that overall story about what's happening within the NPO. Next slide, please. And like I was saying before, it also helps when you're looking at the funds without restrictions to be able to talk about resilience. What is earmarked for particular purposes, and at what is generally available to be used by the NPO. And that can be useful in identifying actually how much buffer does an NPO have about those unexpected circumstances? How far will that closing balance go if something that was not predicted actually happened? Next slide, please. So just turning to the illustrative financial statements, these are included within the implementation guidance, and they're intended to visualize what the outcome of the INPAG requirements might be. They're an illustration of how statements might be presented and notes are presented that we think will be useful for auditors and preparers in trying to work out, well, actually, what is the end result of using INPAG. What we've tried to cover in it is the common transactions that are common to NPOs, rather than all the types of transactions that might be there, because there are a huge range of NPOs that have got transactions of different complexities. We don't show all of those. We don't show options and choices. They're not a checklist. They are just a way of trying to see what the statements might look like. Next slide. So why is this important? The illustrative financial statements are important because they help understanding, but they're also useful to identify whether it answers the key questions that might be important for users of an NPO's financial statements. Does it provide the information about the financial health of an NPO? We know that value for money and efficiency frequently comes up. Does it provide information that might help about that? Does it show information that goes to resilience or dependency on particular income sources or donors? And also things that go to accountability and trust in terms of how an NPO is using its resources. So the financial statements tell you a huge range of things, and that's just the financial statements, not the narrative report, which we don't include an example of. But I think the question is does it provide the right information to be able to inform those kinds of questions? So I'm going to pause at that point, another very, very quick run through.
Thank you so much, Karen. So we're going to break into 3 more breakout rooms. Again, the questions are all here, but they're being sent in a link in the chat. So please download them there. Group 1, please, can you discuss the question set? So this would be 2A. Group 2, can you discuss 2B? And group 3, can you discuss question C? So 1, it's all about funds and the identifying funds, the criteria. The second group is about disclosure requirements and charging other costs to restricted funds, even if they're not eligible. And this third group is all about illustrative financial statements. Okay, so Brian, let's do 15 minutes, and hopefully you can get to grips with the discussion quickly, and we can spend longer on the feedback. That would be super. All right, still got super. Welcome back from those breakout rooms. I hope that was fruitful, and second time round you were able to get going even quicker. So we're going to do the same thing. I've got the poll here, which again, you can use your camera to scan it, or you can copy the link that Brian is putting into the chat and give us some of your thoughts. And if you were taking notes from your group discussion, if you were a note taker, please do tell us as much as you can about the key highlights of your discussions there. That would be very useful. Hope you're managing to access the poll okay. Is the link in the chat? Yes. Yes, it's there. Ah, super. I can see 5 responses so far. Paul, for those those comments from group 3.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think we've heard this point about program admin split has come up before. Yeah, no, so it's interesting to see that that came up in your discussion as well. Not necessarily easy to define, but really it's useful to understand that that is a lens through which people are looking at these things that we need to sort of be mindful of. So very interesting.
And it's interesting to say being too far to disclose overheads on the face of the P&L rather than sort of somewhere in the financial statements in the notes. And I think that reflects sometimes the reaction that they can get from readers. If there's some sort of attitudes towards overheads as if there can be, you know, bad costs rather than the real good costs, which is the program cost. So putting some of that in the notes so that readers who are understanding what they're looking at can find it is an interesting approach. Of course, we've got choices in INPAG, so preparers can choose the way that suits them best. Super, that's really interesting. Anything else from group 1? It'd be great to have some notes of the key points that you discussed.
Yeah, I think getting it has just put some stuff in there about assets and liabilities.
Yeah, that's interesting. So assets and liabilities will be a burden, but then the other group said it's really important to split out cash, especially. And I know other people have said it's really important to split out non-current assets according to whether they're restricted. So it's a real trade-off, isn't it? The importance of that information and the ability and the burden to do it.
Yeah. And I think in group 2, I think Rasmimi is mentioned here about the potential tension between what is eligible in terms of what a grantor will permit or a donor will permit versus what it is, what it costs to actually carry out the activities. So we recognise the tension there, but we think it's really important to show the full cost of running the activities, because we frequently hear that donors don't provide all of the costs needed to fund the activities. So, you know, having that information may help future discussions with those donors about the funds needed to support activities. But we think the supplementary statements is a way of addressing that, because if the total cost of a fund includes things that have not been funded by the donor, they can be shown in a separate column. You can have the donor funded element in one column and funded by the NPO in a separate column. So we think that's actually quite useful, provides additional information in terms of what's there. Sam, do we want to look at the poll responses?
Do that. So here we are. This is question 1. We had 13 responses. That's great. Do you want to just comment on them, Karen?
Yeah, so I think that noting the point that was raised about the difficulty for smaller NPOs in tracking assets and liabilities, I think there is support that they should be tracked if there is a fund. And I can say that when we were developing this, we were mindful about sort of cost benefit and unintended burdens, and we were thinking that maybe if an NPO couldn't track it, then maybe it's not a fund, and that might be a sensible outcome so that you don't require too much reporting. So interesting, but good to see a bit more about the buts on that for those that are concerned, and it may be about overburdening NPOs in terms of size. The criteria for a fund, similar, 93% saying yes, but a larger amount with a yes but, which is that's really interesting, that there are some concerns about that. Really good to hear a bit more about that, because that's probably things that we haven't heard elsewhere in terms of any reservations about the criteria for a fund to be a fund with restrictions. Sam, do you agreeing with that? I can see you nodding.
Not controversial items, is it? So it'd be really important to understand that. If you put yes, but please tell us why.
Yeah, that'd be great. What can be charged? I think, yeah, the all eligible direct and share cost is probably fairly uncontroversial. I think the controversial bits are more about the unfunded costs and the support costs. So interesting to see that fewer of you think that they should be charged. So half of you more concerned about that. So that's interesting to see. And the proposed disclosure requirements. So again, we have so a good statistic, there's 93 are saying yes, a smaller in the yes but category on this. And again, good to know why there is a question mark about that. Sam, I think whilst I've been talking, I see that there are some more comments that have been added in the chat.
Yeah, some really good detail from Malai about identifying funds and capacity in smaller NPOs. I think are really front of mind here. Resource intensive to track, significant investment in financial management systems and staff training, and yeah.
I mean, I was just going to say, if people have got concerns, around this, really good to hear through the formal response, concerns about cost benefit, because I think that will really help us evaluate this as we take it forward.
Brilliant. So that nicely brings me on, Karen, to please do. You've attended this event. It's brilliant. And thank you so much for these comments, which are rich and really help us add nuance. But submitting a response, a formal response to ED3 is really the best way for your voice and your opinion to be heard. It's analysed. It's part of the formal analysis that goes. In fact, just next week, we're planning a paper for the practitioner advisory group, which is all about analysis of feedback from ED2. So please, 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 even if you submit one thing, but it's something you care about, it's better to do it through the formal channels. So you go to the website and click on INPAG and have your say, or follow this link here. There are now 2 ways that you can do this on the website. So one is the formal full written response, where you download the template, you can answer the questions, the 37 questions that are included in there. You don't have to answer them all, but there are specific questions. And you upload the document through the website. The deadline for that is the 16th of September. That is great if you're submitting on behalf of an organization, or you want to have space to really flesh out and provide some richness and some thoughts behind your opinions. We love these full written responses, and they really help us to understand the issues, the problems, and things like that. The other way is a survey, which we actually issued just earlier this week. It's a SurveyMonkey survey with 45 questions. You can also find the link to that survey from Have Your Say. It's much more like this yes, but no, not sure, but without so much room and opportunity to really flesh it out. There are some open comment boxes as well, but that's a bit more of a quick and dirty. Let's hopefully get a bigger quantity of responses so that we can get a sense of general levels of support or not for different areas. So please do one or both of those. That survey will be open until the 30th of September. So there's a bit longer to complete the survey. But as I say, that formal responding through those channels is the best way to really have your voice heard. I hope this event has also been just helpful in understanding some of the key things and forming your views and hearing and discussing with others. Some things you can do, I'll share this link with you, obviously in the whole slide deck with you. There's the website, there's the newsletter. We're very active on LinkedIn. You can join our YouTube channel. There's a page on the website now where you can show your support with your organizational logo or you as an individual to show that you are in support of the objectives of this project. Even if you disagree with some aspects of INPAG, that's what this is all about. It's about getting stakeholder feedback. So with that, thank you, Karen. Thank you, each and every one of you, for turning up. Thank you, Brian, for producing everything in the background. And as I say, this was our last event in the whole of the INPAG consultation that we'll be doing before we next publish the final draft, the final version of INPAG next year. We will, of course, be doing focus groups and advisory group meetings if you're in those, and we look forward to staying in touch. Don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any problems or questions or views to share. We love hearing from you. All the very best. Thank you very much,
everyone. Great to see you all, and thanks for your contributions. Thank you.